Hi, Bill. How are you doing today?
Hey, Robin, I am living off the land and feeling grateful, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Spent the weekend at the circus and the circuit, learning how to be a clown and learning how to drive very, very fast, which some people might also call clown behavior. Ha 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 ha.
Right,
Go ho
that's what
ho
the
ho.
analytics say.
Yeah, so Cato Networks, we sponsor the Porsche Formula E racing team. So if you see Formula E and you see lots of fast driving cars, our logo is plastered all over it. But I've been
Oh,
a
yeah.
petrol head for many a year. So it's always good to get down to the track, to get into the weeds, into the gubbins, get covered in grease, and then tell the wife that you've been doing legitimate things, not
Well,
just
it's true, but
stealing
you
spark
can't get
plugs.
covered in grease anymore, and there's no gasoline. You're living off the lecky,
Mhm.
baby.
Indeed. Well, you have to move with the times. You really
That's right.
have to. Um, I mean, a lot of these electric vehicles, they have people concerned because you can't really see what's happening under the hood and you have to just
Oh,
trust the process. If you
right.
go back to the 1970s, you can get a carburetor, you can hit it with a hammer, you can make it work. That percussive maintenance will get you where you need to be. But electric
Yeah,
people are fearful. So,
yeah,
talking about being under the hood, let's talk about tunneling. Let's just jump
yeah,
straight into it.
yeah,
Over
yeah.
to you, Ben.
So, yeah, I said at the outset that I was living off the land, and Robin, as a cybersecurity practitioner yourself, I did catch you flinch a little bit for those that aren't watching on video. But living off the land means something entirely potentially different to those of us in the cybersecurity world. For those that aren't familiar with the term, living off the land is something that threat actors can potentially do to carry out their objectives by utilizing tools that are accepted. So it could be tools that come with operating systems and so forth. In our particular instance, though, I wanted to talk about DNS and
Mhm.
specifically DNS tunneling. Now, this is a technique that threat actors have been using for, boy, Robin, I think it's north of 20 years when we
Mhm.
really became aware of this. One example that comes to my mind that is still very much in the news today is Oil Rig, the Oil Rig
Mhm.
threat group, which is a nation state actor, been tied to nation state activities. But DNS. Most folks know what DNS is. For those who don't, it's basically the phone book for the internet. That's a really simplistic way to say it. So, how do I take a human readable thing like Amazon.co.uk and turn it into one of those esoteric IP addresses that we connect to so that our browsers can let us, shop online for our favorite Formula E gear? So, that's essentially what it is. But to break it down in technical terms a little bit more, Robin, we know that ordinarily when you are using something like a browser and you're looking up a domain name, and I'll use the example we gave, Amazon.co.uk.
Other
The
domain
UK
names are
portion is,
available.
oh, yeah. That's our. I'm glad you checked. um, Amazon.co.uk, the UK portion, that's the top level domain. Then there's a
Mhm.
second level, which is the CO, and then in this particular instance, the Amazon portion is the third level. Now, each of these levels are referred to as labels. So, if you're thinking in very basic terms, anything separated by a dot is a label, and those labels can be up to 63 characters long. Okay, great. So what? Right? What does this have to do with threat actors? Well, threat actors can utilize these facts to do not only command and control, but they can actually exfiltrate data simply using these URLs, right? Using these labels. So, DNS
Mhm.
tunneling is a technique that uses those labels to either do command and control or to actually take data out of an organization. Think ransomware, Robin, right? And one of the six
Mhm.
E's is exfiltration, taking data. So, how
Mhm.
do the threat actors actually do this? So, after they have managed to get in and they've managed to do their lateral movement, they will, if they haven't already pre established it, they will set up a DNS server and they
Mhm.
will register a domain that the malware, whatever the malware is trying to attempt, will reach out and contact. And what they will do is, because DNS is something that is allowed in the environment, they feel confident that they'll be able to utilize DNS queries to get data out of there or to do command and control. So let's get specific, Robin. I set up a domain. Let's call it evildomain.com. Right.
Ooh,
now, I probably wouldn't use that.
Don't navigate to that. Oh, dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's just it, Robin. I use it as an example, but it's a terrible example, because anybody who's watching is going to see DNS requests for evildomain.com and say, that's probably not good. Right. So typically what threat actors will do is they'll typo squat. So we had a recent instance that we identified where the domain they set up was oneiDrive.com instead of onedrive.com, right, from Microsoft. So they were kind of squatting on a typo, hoping that nobody would actually see it. Or they may use something like a domain generating algorithm, which we've discussed previously. But here's what happens. They set that up. They make sure that it's registered with a DNS server that they have access to. And then the malware will start doing DNS requests. Sounds really simple, right? And chances are the organization will allow that traffic, because DNS, what could possibly go wrong? But what's happening is the threat actor is using maybe the third level label, the third level domain, to actually encode data. So the label contains data. Remember, it can be up to 63 characters long. So, you do the math, that's about 63 bytes of data that they could be literally embedding into the DNS request. And then the threat actor who monitors the requests can see that label, they can strip that label off there, and they can reconstitute the data. So this is pretty slick, being able to do this. So, whether it's, they could be exfiltrating status of a system or linking it up with Mimikatz and exfiltrating credentials. That's another great way to utilize DNS tunneling, or even data payload. They're literally stealing data. So this is one that ransomware actors would love to use. Now, the reply could even trigger command and control. So depending on the reply that the malicious DNS server gives back, it could actually trigger something from a command and control standpoint, or, as I said, really assemble that data. So here's the trick here, Robin. We've got multiple contexts that we need to be checking to prevent DNS tunneling, because, again, we're living off the land. We're going to allow DNS traffic. So we need to look at things like, how old is the domain? What's the domain's age? What's the domain's reputation? If it's a previously established domain, does it have a reputation? Can we tell if it was generated with a domain generating algorithm? Are we using typo squatting? We even might need to be able to determine if DNS tunneling is taking place based on the number of DNS queries, right? So we've got to monitor the amount of traffic. And even the label itself. So that little portion of the label that we talk about that may have that data, we might need machine learning to take a look at that and say, you know what, this does not look like a known language. This looks like it could actually be code, or it could be data, or any number of items. So point is, probably the best way to be able to mitigate this is you're going to have unified context to take a look at this traffic, because, again, it's living off the land. It's very, very difficult to catch these kinds of things, because DNS is used so much in the environment, and it's usually given unrestricted access. So how do you mitigate?
Actually,
unified context?
It's really easy to mitigate, actually, Bill. Super easy. You just don't use DNS. Own real
Right.
IT enthusiasts only remember IP addresses. If you use DNS, you're a poser. You're not really into it. Yeah, you need to compile Gen2 from source, or with Linux, you need to be typing every single IP address, or alternatively, just run your own DNS internally. Stand up your own DNS server, and anything that doesn't match, block. Google.com? No, we don't need that. Co.uk, that's all you need. Stick to the
Do, do
British.
we do we refer to those people as IP kitties that require DNS? Right. I mean, my gosh.
So
No, you're right. I
let's
mean,
be more
sure.
realistic.
Yeah, right, right. Exactly. No, so
So
you're
how
right.
can we
I mean,
mitigate?
there's certain we could certainly get crazy about it, and it's ridiculous, right? It interferes with the ability to do business and so forth. So you're going to have to
Mhm.
allow the traffic. We know that it's what happens today, but you're going to have to put something on top that is really watching. It's utilizing machine learning.
Mhm.
It's looking at domain, all those things that we just mentioned. We
Mhm.
certainly we can certainly bring that to the table, and I would argue that's probably the easiest way is
Mhm.
have a solution that is a true SASE solution that has that unified context and can identify from one or many of those characteristics that we're looking at potential DNS tunneling.
Okay, so from just to, I like analogies and the metaphors and all of
Of
that
course.
fun. So I'm stood at a delivery center. I'm staring over a banister and I'm seeing thousands of parcels underneath me. The majority of these parcels are legitimate. They have their name, they have their addresses, the DNS query is identified.
That's right.
So how do I identify which parcel is trying to tunnel in the wrong direction? You say
Right.
AI, but what sort of patterns do I need to look for to make sure that it's going to a legitimate instead of an illegitimate location?
Yeah, I mean that's the task of machine learning, right? Machine learning is understanding, whether it's the language itself and recognizing that
Mhm.
this doesn't match a pattern. There are formats, right? We certainly understand that using the parcel analogy, that addresses have a format, and if that format doesn't look right, if it looks like something is unusual or it's sharing information that it shouldn't, then we need to be able to catch that. Um,
Mhm.
is the address a legitimate address? Where's this parcel supposedly going? So yeah, it's any number of those things that a model like that is going to have to learn and correlate
Mhm.
in order to identify that particular parcel might be carrying something it shouldn't.
So if you don't have an architecture that has single analytical context powered by
Mm,
machine learning, doing
mhm.
reputation analysis, doing URL or secure web gateway, intercepting all of that data,
That's right.
how can you protect? Because it seems like this is a very big area. You can't block all DNS traffic. That is ridiculous. You
Of course.
can't snipe individual DNS requests from the entire barrier unless you're doing full URL analysis. And I think anybody with greater than 2 employees trying to monitor all the traffic or every
Mm,
website access, that is an unrealistic expectation. Unless
that's
you
right.
hire one network monitoring person to one individual. I feel like the FBI or the CIA does. You get your allocated agent when you join the internet. They monitor
Right.
everything you do. And we all know that happens.
That's
But
right.
how can you
That's right.
prevent against it?
Well, as you said, mitigating this is highly restrictive. You have to have that solution with the unified context, and certainly that's something that we try to bring to the table. I think very successfully because we can demonstrate any number of use cases that are combined. Combining both typo squatting with domains that are recently registered, and then
Mhm.
identifying that traffic is being tunneled out on the third level domain in that URL. So we have a demonstrated track record of being able to do that. And Robin, you've got to be able to do that without building a massive staff.
Oh,
And
definitely.
that's the benefit of this security as a solution. Look, that you've got an entire team of threat analysts and data analysts that are behind you that are able to identify those kinds of things, develop signatures, develop the intelligence behind the scenes that's going to be able to do that. And the thing that you need to worry about is making sure that you have your incident response plan ready to go when that's identified.
Hmm.
Much,
Indeed.
much better approach. Base it on policy, be ready for your incident response, and know how to mitigate immediately.
Indeed. And if you do have a SASE solution, or if you have adopted a full SASE architecture, the cloud managed context will make this a whole lot easier because
Certainly will.
everything will be logged, everything will be captured, everything's indexed.
That's
Your
right.
secure web analysis in all forms will be consistent at every edge, and you will also benefit from the collective hive mind of others. So
That's right.
if we or if they, I say they, if a SASE vendor identifies some poor traffic or some attempted DNS tunneling to a a newly generated domain on one customer, they should have the collective brains to be able to apply that protection everywhere. So you benefit from the power of the group or the power of collective.
That's right.
But Bill, sometimes, though, having the power of collective can actually cause a little bit of pain if mishandled or misappropriated. That's a hard word to say.
It is.
Have you ever heard of a tool called Shodan?
Oh my goodness, yes, Showdown, absolutely. It's a mainstay of let's say OSINT, Robin.
Mm-hmm. Open source intelligence. Everything you can, say, or will provide to the internet will definitely be used against you one way or another.
That's right. Tell us the dangers, Robin. What do you got with Shodan?
Indeed, well, Showdown, for those who aren't aware, is effectively a database. It's a collection of machines, cameras, internet-connected devices, one way or another. And Showdown indexes all of this. It archives and gets as much publicly accessible information as possible. This might include basic things like IP addresses on locations, but it might also include data such as, the manufacturer and firmware version of your internet-connected camera. Or it might be able to be used to find websites that have unsecured logins or servers connected to the internet using default admin credentials. So anybody with a slight amount of curiosity can hop onto the website, which is freely accessible, search for a specific item, and then validate or understand their device posture or security posture. Now, the legitimate legal reason for using this bill is quite simple. Verify that your environment is locked down and nothing that you're putting to the internet is shown to be vulnerable. And that's what everybody uses Showdown for, of course. You go on there, you search for your IP addresses, you search for your locations, and verify nothing pops up. There we go. That's, I think, have you ever used Showdown for this purpose?
I have used it multiple times for that purpose. Absolutely. Exclusively?
Exclusively. Well, Showdown, there's multiple websites like this, but Showdown, I think, is probably the largest.
It is.
Probably followed closely by Censys, maybe, but Showdown is currently the big one. Now, I used to use Showdown for just looking around to identify any form of vulnerability or open source. And that used to take a little while, typing the right vendor name in, trying to find the right OS type, the IPs, zooming in on a location, building your search string. It might have taken 15 to 20 minutes to build that craft. However, this week, something bad happened. Something good happened. Something changed. Yes. And that is the advent of AI, the artificial intelligence applied to Shodan. To instead of having to craft a unique search string, you can use plain text.
That's right.
Hop on there and type, find me unencrypted cameras.
Right.
So out of interest, theoretically, one could go online and type, find me unencrypted cameras. And within a few seconds, be able to see into stores or people's homes, their drives. Or theoretically, not that I found it, maybe a few Airbnb cameras, which have default admin login credentials, broadcasting people's private, sensitive lives to the world because they're unscrupulous people that want to monitor people 24/7. Or theoretically, of course. Now, This opens a massive, massive flaw to the world. AI is not new. AI has been around for many years, but the accessibility of generative and programmatic AI has become crazy easy over the past few months. Anybody can hop onto ChatGPT or Midjourney or DALL-E and generate something mediocre. And that's fine, because mediocrity is generally the purpose of AI. It establishes a baseline, a canvas from an artist to work from. It removes writer's block for those who want to be creative professionals. But now that AI has stepped into the world of vulnerability identification, all of the script kiddies, all of the naysayers and the ne'er-do-wells can quite quickly hop on and say, hey, Shodan, find me unsecured RDP access on Windows 7 terminals in New York. And within a few moments, they have access. So tell me, Bill, how can we protect against this robotic AI overlord? What can we do to lock down our environments?
This is a big philosophical conversation, Robin, because for the longest time, it was thought that a good solution was security by Obscurity. And
Mm-hmm.
that was not only from the perspective of looking at your footprint and making sure that that was as minimized as possible, but also the obscurity of tool sets. So, I think of things like, I'm going to give an analogy as well. I think of things like lock picks for physical locks. There used to be a day when it was nigh on to impossible to get a hold of lock picks to actually do lock crafting, and therefore it was secure.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's very, very easy to get out on a site like I mentioned earlier and buy yourself a kit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the most horrifying things I learned, this is just an aside, Robin, but one of the most horrifying things I learned is that the standard door lock that you would find in the United States only has about 72,000 possible combinations. So if you live in a
Mm-hmm.
city bigger than 72,000 people, chances are extraordinarily high, without going into the birthday hypothesis, chances are extraordinarily high that somebody has your same key, right? So
Yep.
going back to what you're talking about here, the applying of generative adversarial networks, or we'll call them AI, to these tool sets really increases the accessibility of the tool. And of course, that does become dangerous because now you get those whose expertise may be much lower, but whose interest in doing something fun is much higher. You've now really increased your attack surface, so to speak, or certainly the
Mm-hmm.
number of, to use a sports analogy, number of shots on goal. So,
Mm-hmm.
really good philosophical question. How do we protect against something like that? Well, how do you protect against increased availability to your house keys? Well, you're going to have to increase the complexity of the system.
Mm-hmm. But there will still be people who get drunk at the bar and leave their house keys up, up in one place. Or
Sure.
the people, going back to the motor analogy even further back, people who have their sat nav with their home address set as home. And then when their car keys get stolen,
That's
they
right.
know that nobody's at home and they get taken home. And then they do even more. Security through obscurity has never been a good approach,
No,
but it's been an acceptable approach.
it
Having
has.
long URL paths, having very difficult to navigate websites. And if you've ever tried using the IRS websites, that's security through obscurity as well. You can't find what you need when you need it.
Right.
But now that accessibility is becoming at the forefront, either with these large language models, one way or another, or through just making technology more accessible for those with disabilities, the
Right.
security itself is diminishing. So you need to be focused more on the underlying underpinning technology to actually protect and prevent where you are. So websites like Showdown, it's just the start. This isn't going to be the end. This is very much the tip of the iceberg. And we are going to see more legitimate breaches, not through very complex technological means, but purely from people having the Internet of Things connected to a publicly accessible resource that somebody's just clicked one day and gained access to.
Of course.
Some people might think that, oh, okay, a camera in an office, that's fine. Somebody can see what they're going to see. Me walking down the hallway, but
Right.
then, yeah, they see you working down the hallway. They identify your moving patterns. They identify who's in the office, when they're in the office. Maybe they're carrying sensitive documents. Maybe you start to share more than you realize. Some of these cameras have microphones, actually pick up audio, what's being shared. The chances of you being attacked, probably slim. However, if I told you somebody was always watching you in your living room, would you rest peacefully? Probably not. I can stand outside your window, Bill, and not do anything and just stare into your window all day, every day. If
Sure.
you're comfortable with that, then fine. But most people, you think that's
Not so
going to be
good.
a risk.
You're
Somebody's
right.
doing something for a reason. So you need to lock down that some way.
That's right.
So
That's right.
Shodan, it's still in this beta, but it's pretty powerful so far. Where would you think the next bone rattling thing will be?
Well, I think it's just, I think the bone rattling piece is going to be the expansion of the application of this
Mm-hmm.
technology. I'm also excited about it, Robin, because just as it's expanding and creating additional opportunities to attack, it's also expanding in terms of us getting smarter about how we as defenders try to defend. So it's an
Mm-hmm.
interesting time we certainly live in. In fact, I would invite anybody, if you're not familiar with Kirchhoff's principle, it's a principle often applied to cryptography. go do some research on Kirchhoff's principle, because it applies to cybersecurity and this question of artificial intelligence and the systems that are being built utilizing it. I think it'll give you a good picture for where we are, where we're going, and how both exciting and troubling the future looks right now.
Well, on that depressing note, Bill, thank you for your time. You stay safe out there, buddy.
Yeah, you too. Take care, Robin.